You're watching BCTV, Branford's community access station.
This is BCTV, Branford Government Television, a service of Branford Community Television. The following program is brought to you through the support of the Town of Branford.
Hi, my name is Phil Carloni. I'm the chair of the steering committee for the Plan of Conservation and Development, and I'd like to call the February 7th meeting to order. First order of business is for a to accept the minutes from our last meeting. If someone could make a motion to do that.
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes from last meeting.
Thank you. Second? Second. Any discussion on the meetings, on the minutes, excuse me, from the last meeting? Nope. All right. All in favor of approving minutes?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. All right. We are going to ask Glenn Chalter, our consultant, to give us an overview of today's meeting and get things started.
See a number of familiar faces here in the audience, and for the committee members, we're going to run this meeting like we have our prior meetings. There's really a couple of major parts to the meeting. We've invited some participants, municipal department heads, and other people involved in infrastructure-related issues, which is the topic of our meeting tonight, giving them the opportunity to provide materials to the board or provide information to us this evening. We're going to be having a discussion amongst the steering committee members about the booklets, which are the subject of today's meeting. These are all numbered 6, if you will, in a series. These are available on the town website. They have been available on the town website for about the past week? Yes. Yes. So for those of you with smartphones or perhaps had a chance to print them, booklet 6A is about community facilities. Booklet 6B is about vehicular transportation. Booklet 6C is about pedestrian, bicycle, and transit facilities. And then 6D is about utility infrastructure. We'll be talking about some of the recommendations and frameworks in those booklets to, again, familiarize the committee and get some consensus on these particular issues. And at the end of the meeting, we have an open discussion where the audience will get a chance to give us thoughts and feedback, if you will, on these topics as part of the Plan of Conservation and Development. Any questions from the committee in terms of the protocol? I think, Mr. Chairman, it's all right with you. We've invited some people to attend the meeting. And yep. Anybody here from the Board of Education? Schools? No. Anybody here from Board of Recreation? Please, if you come to the microphone, that'd be great. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Paul Criscolo, the chairman of the Board of Recreation, and our director, Alex Paluzzi.
Do you have any comments you want to?
No, maybe after.
Okay. Thank you. Commission on Elderly Services?
Hi, I'm Dagmar Ridgway. I'm director of the Senior Center, the building you're in right now. And I just want to thank you for the work that you're doing, because it was the plan in 2008 is one of the reasons that we've moved forward with our building project relocation of our facilities to an accessible facility. And that should be done in October. But if that plan hadn't been in place 10 years ago, predicting our aging demographics, we may not be where we are today. So I want to thank you for that. And I did hand out just some brief comments. I did not read your stuff, but I typed together something very quickly that I have. And the bad news is Branford is an aging community. Currently, 37% of our population is over the age of 60. And by 2025, over 42% of our population will be over the age of 60. And on page 2 of what I gave you is some data that I got from the ConnecticutData.org website, which clearly shows, if you kind of analyze them a little bit, and I'm sure you have in your planning, that the shift is the baby boomers will be aging over the next 10 years. And if you look at where the population lies, that's really going to be quite a significant portion of our population. And our infrastructure has to address that. The good news is that the town of Branford has embraced the last plan of conservation and development and has been very active in moving forward with the challenges that we face as a community. And as you're focusing on, one of the things you're focusing on is facilities. And over the last 10 years, the town government and community members have been very active and vocal, along with the seniors who have been very active and vocal, in trying to get a facility that is accessible and that will hold us for generations to come, that it has functionality and flexibility. We're currently undergoing a $12.25 million renovation of the current community house, which will be home to the Board of Recreation, Office of the Recreation Department, as well as Canoe Brook. And I think that's essential in providing a place that's accessible to Branford residents of all ages. Under transportation, in the last few years, we've purchased 6 vehicles, 3 medical cars and 3 buses to continue to provide a way to get people here to the senior center, grocery shopping, and medical transportation. The medical transportation is for people of all ages. Branford's a great place to be if you're someone who needs services, not only because of what the municipality provides, but what the community provides. In transportation, we do 10 to 12,000 rides a year. It's a 60-40 split. 60% of that is our buses, and 40% is medical transportation that is for residents of all ages. And I'm very interested in that you're developing a transportation system to help address that. It's imperative that we continue to maintain what we have in transportation services, as it is the link that helps people remain independent and active in our community. Also, the Gray and New Haven Transit District, which is funded by state and federal funds, currently provides about 1,000 rides to Branford seniors and disabled residents that cannot use the Connecticut Transit. So that is important that we continue to support that as well. In social services, I felt that was really an important thing to just touch on, that with federal and state funding reducing, cuts that are being made, it's really important that the community, people turn to their local community for support. We're lucky that we do have the support of the municipality. We recently added a caseworker to our team to help address the increased demand for programs and services, and also to alleviate some of the financial burden on the local taxpayers, in that we really want to transition people into the state and federal programs before they disappear, so they'll remain grandfathered in. Also, the generosity of the greater Branford community helps us fill the gaps with programs that are out there to help people that there are no other places to turn. So we're lucky with that. The one thing, and I'm sure Peter will speak to it, is that affordable housing, I think, is really, really important. As we have an aging population and they go on to Social Security and they're living off of that, affordable housing in Branford is a challenge for many, many residents of all ages, not just seniors, but families as well. And we try to link them into as many programs we can for assistance. The problem is the amount of units that are affordable to people on a fixed income is very limited, and we hope to see that grow, and we advocate very heavily to have that happen in this community, so people who've laid the foundation for our community for all the past years can continue to remain here. Under programming, the one thing, there was a study that recently came out from BYU that was a long-term study, that the 2 top predictors of whether or not how long you're going to live aren't whether you quit smoking, aren't your diet, aren't your exercise. Those are in the top 10. But the top 2 are the close relationships you have, and that just can be not just your family, but your wider circle of people, where Canoe Brook, I think we do a great job with that. And also social integration was the #1 predictor of how long people would live. And that means talking to the person that gives you coffee, talking to your senior center bus driver, talking to your mailman, the person at the grocery store, So social integration is the number one thing, and I think we give lots of opportunities for people to do that as we promote health and wellness and people interconnecting with each other. So I kind of put in there, we may be aging, but we plan on you living a long life if you live in Branford. That's pretty much all I have.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you,
You're
nice
welcome.
job. Next, we have Human Services Board.
Hi, excuse me, I have a cold, so I don't normally sound like
Back
this.
away from the microphone.
It doesn't sound kind of sexy, does it? Peter Semino, Branford Counseling Center, I'm Executive Director. I think Dagmar said a lot of things that, you know, I will agree on, but I think the most pressing issue for us is not affordable housing, it's low-income housing. A lot of the people that we work with, and I think the problem with that is I think some people think affordable housing, well, okay, they make $40,000 a year and they got a family of 2 or something like that. People we work with, we're lucky if they can make $16,000 a year. Average Social Security if they're on disability is about $800 a month. So the difficulty is trying to find low-income housing that will accept this population of people that we work with. And we work with these people every day. Branford is fortunate, or the people of Branford is fortunate because the town does give us money, we call it now our basic needs account. It's about $53,000. By the end of January, we've gone through that money and putting people up specifically for emergency housing. We also help people with their needs for not rent. We do help some people with their rent, but some people sometimes with their fuel. If they live in a trailer, they're having a difficult time with the gasoline or the kerosene that they have to put in there, so we help them with that. So a lot of our money goes through that, but a majority of it goes through the emergency housing. We put people up in motels. If we could put people into low-income housing and stabilize them, they're going to be more productive, and they're going to be able to sustain themselves in this community. Now, there are more resources in New Haven, but people want to stay in Branford because they do have a lot of resources here. School system is great. Social services is great. Go to the library, they can hang out there all day. We respond to the needs of the people that need that, especially the ones that are stuck in homeless camps around the town here. And right now it's kind of cold. So 10 years ago, when I saw what you did last time, and I wasn't here at the time, there was a paragraph about inclusionary housing, where, and I'm not sure how contractors would like this, but I guess all the affordable housing units that would be built in town, they would pay a fee in lieu of. And I would think, for me, and the way I'm looking at that, the money would be put aside to be used for people or to build low-income housing or affordable housing. Or maybe defray some of the costs that the town is paying for to keep people in motels, hopefully for that short time. So I really think you have to look at this, that it's important that we get people into affordable, low-income housing that they can afford, and we can help them stay in there, sustain them in there. And along with that is the transportation piece, because they need to get from point A to point B. And that's a whole different story altogether. But I would like, really, you can consider the inclusionary housing might be a good option, that we can have everyone in the community help the town and help the people that need it the most. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on our list is Public Building Commission. Shoreline Greenway.
Hi, I'm Judy Miller. I'm the chair of the Shoreline Greenway Trail. I would just like to say that I'm happy that the way these have been going, and I've been happy to see so many people comment on the need for safer bicycling and walking here in Branford. I want to start by commenting as the chair of the Greenway Trail, I attend conferences in Connecticut, the Greenways Council, and I look at other trails all around. And I realize, as I said in my introduction to the report I submitted to you,
With a railroad station, a river, and open space at or near the center of town, Branford is virtually unique among shoreline towns in its potential to benefit from the development of its portion of the Shoreline Greenway Trail and of opportunities for safe biking and walking. Such development can play a key role in making Branford a center of tourism for the shoreline. In the report I submitted, I'd like to point out two things. I think we maybe don't pay enough attention to tourism, and certainly tourism and economic development can be a major factor. The first thing that we would suggest, of course, is completing the Shoreline Greenway Trail in Branford between the railroad station and the village of Stony Creek, which is approximately 4 miles. If any of you are familiar with it, you know that a lot of the sections of that trail have in fact been completed, and I'm happy to thank the town for working with a federal grant to complete the Tabor Trail portion, which will be open hopefully at the end of April. For maximum impact on bicycle tourism and commuting, we would like to recommend that the town make the proposed trail along the Branford River a multi-use trail, part of the Shoreline Greenway Trail if possible. I know that there is a plan out there. We haven't been part of that plan. And I think for now it may be pedestrian. But again, if you're familiar with the area between Indian Neck Avenue and South Montaouise, if you're going to create a trail that is attractive for commuters, say people coming from Pine Orchard and the eastern sections to the railroad station, or if you're creating a trail along the river that's attractive to people from other towns, a tourist attraction, making it a multi-use trail would be a lot more effective than a simple bicycle trail, a pedestrian trail. So we would urge that that be done if at all possible. The other part of the tourism piece of this is an absolutely inexpensive idea, again, something that's virtually already in place. You could create a recreational loop that would connect the new Tabor Trail to the Branford Trail. Again, you have to be kind of familiar with the geography to understand this. That would go south of the Tabor property up to Ecology Park, which I think is one of our underused resources from what I've been able to gather, and back down around the loop on Ecology Park and back down. That would be about a 2-mile loop. And if you promoted it, signed it, perhaps fixed up a few of the places, I think it could be a great attraction for people here in Branford, neighbors, looking for a nice two-mile way. You go past a pond, you go through beautiful forest, and then you go up to Ecology Park with its 360-degree views of Branford and the Sound and so forth. So those are the two tourist-oriented pieces of my report. The other things I'll just mention briefly, some of these are in the booklet that you created. To work on a plan to develop safe routes to schools. There is an organization called the Safe Routes to School that can be a source of advice on this. Some of this actually would connect with the Shoreline Greenway Trail. The Walsh School and the Tisco School could easily be connected along Pine Orchard Road. But encouraging children to ride bicycles to school and making it safe for them to do so. Think of all of those cars that idle in front of our schools these days as parents drop off their children. Maybe you could reduce a little bit of that. The other one, people again have mentioned this, is providing safe bicycle and pedestrian connections among key sites in the town of Branford. The railroad station, Branford Point, the library, Harrison House, the Willoughby Wallace Library, etc. Making Branford Center bicycle friendly by creating bike lanes or sharrows, more bike racks for parking. Create bicycle connections from the center to other sections of town. Developing a plan to make Branford a bicycle-friendly community. If we could increase our ranking on the Bike Walk Connecticut Bike Walk Friendly Town scorecard, we are now 58 out of 169, which isn't too bad, but we could do better. And if we could seek silver status from the League of American Bicyclists categorization of bicycle-friendly communities, bicyclists and people looking for a town to move to, look at these rankings. and they're part of decision-making for moving or for tourism. As part of that, one of the most important things we would like to recommend is to create a bicycle pedestrian advisory committee. This was in the previous plan of conservation and development, and it was not implemented. As I've looked around at towns like Canton, Collinsville, Salisbury, they are thriving economic centers in terms of tourism because they have committees that are actively engaged in making this happen. This committee could help the town develop a town-wide plan for bicycle pedestrian safety and accessibility. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Solid Waste Management Commission? Water Commission? Water Pollution Control Authority? Board of Finance? Board of Selectmen? Okay, that brings us now to part 5 of the meeting? Yep. For members of the audience, for members of the committee, the infrastructure elements of the plan, as I mentioned earlier, there's 4 booklets that have been prepared, the first of which relates to community facilities, the second is vehicular transportation, third is pedestrian, bike, and transit, and the fourth is utility infrastructure. Just like to walk you through the booklets here. Again, we recognize that people in the room here tonight and even watching on community TV won't be able to read these, but the booklets are on the town website, and we encourage you to take a look and play along and send us your comments. In terms of community facilities, this includes all the facilities that the town uses to provide services to residents. There is a listing in the booklet and also a map which identifies the location of these facilities in Branford overall. In 2012, I believe it was, the Phase 1 community facilities evaluation was done, which really looked at all of the community facilities in Branford at that time, and it had some major recommendations which were identified here on page 4. And it recommended some continuing evaluation work go on in terms of the condition of facilities, the array of facilities that the town owns, and how to organize some of those needs. There are a number of facilities which are town-owned and not town-used. There are some facilities that are town-used and not town-owned. And there might be a way to address town needs more effectively, and possibly even repurposing some facilities. The overall recommendations at this point in time in the POCD, it really kind of breaks down into sort of 3 main areas. The first of which is address, this is on page 6 of the booklet, address near-term needs or issues. And the ones that are identified here are the Public Works Facility, completing the renovation of Walsh Intermediate School, completing the relocation of the Senior Center to the Community House, and then completing the expansion of the Blackstone Library. So 3 of those projects are underway. So follow those through to completion. And then the only other one is what to do with the Public Works Facility. In terms of a long-term approach, we don't necessarily have to solve it today, but figure out what our approach is going to be. The next major strategy in terms of medium-term needs and issues would be a comprehensive evaluation of community facilities, including what to do with some of the facilities that, what do we do with this building when we're not occupying it anymore for the senior center or other facilities in town. Within the last 10 years, Branford Hills Schools, for example, was retired. The property was converted into open space, recreation, et cetera. So these are issues as part of our portfolio of community facilities we can look at. Suggestion that we look at establishing a town-wide maintenance function for all municipal facilities. Right now, the town and the Board of Ed maintain their own facilities, and there can be some inefficiencies, and some communities have found efficiencies by merging those together. Another recommendation here about revisiting and clarifying the role of the Public Building Commission in terms of their responsibility. Is it strategic? Is it tactical in terms of managing projects? And developing a recreation facilities plan to ensure that there are sufficient facilities throughout Branford to meet the needs of all user groups. And then in terms of long-term needs and issues, the types of things that are recommended here is that we continue to monitor school enrollments. As Dagmar pointed out, our population is aging. The percentage of the population that is enrolled in the school system is becoming a lesser component of our population, but it's also very sensitive to the facilities that are available. So we need to make sure that we're aware of what's happening in terms of school enrollments. Millennials now, many of them have deferred having children. But if there is another little baby boom that comes along the pike, again, our school needs are going to change, and monitoring those will allow us to do that. And then there's some other recommendations here. So they're broken down here in terms of near-term, medium-term, and long-term issues. Questions, comments?
Comment. I thought under long-term needs that evaluating the vulnerability to rising sea levels would be an important one to include. Remind people that the Connecticut Institute for Resilience and Coastal Adaptation is saying we should be planning for a 20-inch rise in sea level by 2050. And 30 years out is not that far.
So I think, I thought much of that had been incorporated into the coastal booklet that we had done. But in this one, I specifically added in the location and adequacy of emergency shelters, because that wasn't something that we had done. And again, depending on what our vulnerabilities are, we need to make sure that our emergency facilities are adequate to respond to those. So does the coastal chapter seem like the right place for that, or here, or both? What do you think?
I actually, in reading particularly the utilities section, I came away feeling like there were important issues that are really interconnected, and we've sort of siloed things and not really, it's like we're talking about resiliency under coastal, but there are resiliency issues related to utilities as well.
Yep.
Under transportation, we're talking about circulation, but there are some issues coming up on the time horizon. Prediction that more and more people are going to be buying electric vehicles. And are they going to just charge them at home? Is there a need to put charging stations in public parking areas, things like that?
Yep. And I think these sorts of issues, the two major, I guess we'll call them environmental issues in terms of sea level rise, rain bombs, and other things like that, are going to filter throughout many of the chapters of the plan. So I think at least we should make sure we put a sidebar in each of these sections which recognizes the issue and the implications, and figure out what's the best place to have the big discussion, if you will, in terms of our approach to that. So I think good idea, Bill. Yes, Kathy?
Yes, I just had a question on the long-term item, evaluate long-term functionality and adequacy of outlying fire stations. Does that mean maintain, enhance?
Not necessarily, no. I think that some of the fire stations, what's the one right across the street here? I'm drawing a blank on it right now. Thank you. So we're not really using the facilities. Our fire staffing is appropriate for our needs, and they roll out of the main station, but we do have these other stations too that provide supplemental activities. Should we beef those up to make sure that we have good protection? Should we retire some of them? What should our approach be? Fire staff are not an inexpensive item, and so how can we deploy these most efficiently and effectively? That's sort of a question. So I don't expect the committee to solve this issue, but I throw it in as sort of a long-range issue for us to think about in terms of how we best provide for fire protection, both in terms of staff and in terms of facilities in the community. We grew up as a series of villages, but having a fire department in each one may not be the optimal long-term strategy for us. Particularly, as Bill points out, if there's any issues related to sea level and rise and other things like that, are these going to affect those issues as well?
And I had one more point. Oh, did you want to comment on that?
I just want to follow up to that, because geographically, Branford is kind of challenged as far as response time.
Yep.
And it's a lot of times a volunteer company in either engine 4 or engine 5 or even engine 2 would end up being the first due for a response, proximate to their service district. And there's a really, sort of fine tradition of volunteerism. It's probably one of the last bastions of volunteerism are the volunteer fire companies. And that's something I think we want to encourage more than discourage, because trying to add additional staff, paid staff to cover these, remote locations for fairly low response quantities. And all of this eventually piles back into insurance ratings. So that's an awful lot of math to have to do, and it's sort of a multiple attribute decision analysis problem rather than it costs this much, so we don't need it anymore.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's why the issue here about evaluating, so maybe we should change it, not just functionality of the fire station, but realistically, what is the most effective way for us to provide fire protection efficiently and economically in the community? And because the travel time between Short Beach and Stony Creek is probably, even in a fire truck, is probably 15 minutes.
Right, you've got somebody at Stony Creek right away.
Yes.
And if you have, the main fire station tied up with something.
Yep.
The opportunity for multiple incidents, even though it doesn't happen very often, or to be able to draw a cover company, it's a fairly complicated management, especially in the face of unpredictable disaster.
Absolutely. And I think that the issue gets more challenging because one of the things in Connecticut, it's wonderful to know that Branford has a tradition of volunteerism and the staffing has been appropriate. It's becoming harder and harder over time due to the increasing volunteer requirements that are placed on people who choose to volunteer.
Sure.
And the aging population challenges that as well. So I think the issue here is that we may be, as Dagmar spoke earlier, a recommendation 10 years ago paid dividends, but this may be one that 20 years from now we'll look back and say, we're glad we kind of thought that through. But I think it's more than just the fire stations, it's the whole fire
Structure.
framework.
Right, there's a culture involved with
Yep.
that really needs to be understood. And then backing that into the math for the insurance ratings.
Yep.
Yeah, I had another point on number 4, continue to monitor how the changing age composition of the community affects the demand for emergency medical services, dial-a-ride, and other services. I think, and I did get to scan the Canoe Brook Center information that was just provided, and although I missed the presentation, the numbers are pretty amazing in terms of 2020 and 2025, the growth in the 75 to 79 year population, and then the 70 to 74 year population. I wonder if we should look at something a little stronger in terms of developing a plan or starting to look at that, because it's going to happen.
It is, and I think that there's no examples in this country that we can point to that reflect what we anticipate our age composition is going to be 10 or 15 years from now. As a country, we've never sort of been this old. So we look at other countries that have some experience in this, and the types of situation they find is that the fire department actually starts spending a lot more time responding to medical calls and the concern about transport. So the fact that we've added 3 vehicles for transport, medical transport, is huge. That's sort of a pre-warning, pre-response type situation. So the verb here was continue to monitor, and maybe we can juice that up a little bit, because the issue might be that we're going to need to do more in terms of medical response, assisted living and other facilities, et cetera, than we've been used to. And so we need to anticipate that.
Right, 2025 isn't that far off.
Don't say that. That's true. Anything else? Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Kathy. Anything else in terms of?
Yeah, can we go back to the medium-term needs?
Sure.
You've got number 2 there, it says established townwide maintenance functions. Has the town ever done anything like a lean event where you get the different groups together and they do a process review so that you could determine whether there are benefits to maybe streamlining the functions or in fact combining them?
Not to my knowledge. It doesn't say that that couldn't be done. The reason that the word here establish is highlighted is because I felt uncomfortable that that was the right verb there. And I wondered if it could be investigate, or whether it could be, because I think there are long-standing traditions about maintenance of municipal facilities in terms of who does what where. And
But you
so
may have multiple groups doing the same functions.
we do.
Yeah.
The question, in a sense, is how do we now bring those together? I think Madison, is my understanding, has done a very effective job of doing this. They've been doing it for at least 10 years now. So there might be some examples there, but both entities doing this today need to start to think about how they could start this process going. And I think one of the benefits of the plan could be to encourage this to happen. That, so again, maybe it's not establish, maybe it's consider, promote, encourage, some verb that sets the right tone, so exactly what you described starts to happen. Can we save money? Can we save resources? Money's going to get tighter and tighter, I think, in town because of what's happening at the state level. So if this is a way that we can become more efficient, economical, and still do a great job, that would be important. So is establish too strong a verb? Should we water that down? Is it okay? Evaluate?
Well, I think establish is kind of a dictatorial, that
Yep.
this is what we're going to do. And I think that changes, if you could get the groups that are doing it together to evaluate what they're doing, a lot of times change is more effective if it comes from within and up instead of from the top down.
I like that. So it would seem to me that a verb like evaluate is probably a good place to start, and then hopefully that would lead to implementation. I think it's a lot softer than establish.
Or encourage.
Encourage and evaluate, there you go. I just flipped it around. Anything else in terms of community facilities?
Glenn, I don't know if it's a question of semantics or location, but I'm just thinking, I was some discussion, I think, in one of the previous meetings about trees and sort of the green infrastructure. And I don't know, maybe that's a good place here, or I don't know exactly where, but.
I think right now in the current configuration, and I think as Joe pointed out, we do, or Bill, I think actually, we have silos right now in terms of the way
Yeah, it is
we've
tough.
diagnosed the issues to talk about. In the final analysis, we may start merging these together, but the issue of trees shows up as community character, because
Yep.
it does add so much, and it also shows up in the utilities section because of the conflict sometimes between trees and power lines. But I think it's both of those areas. It's not really a community facility or service in that regard.
No, but it's actually, you know, they're the ones that are owned by the town have to be managed and taken care of and so forth. So I don't know where exactly it belongs,
Yep.
but.
There are many sort of cross-linked concepts that go on here, and it's really difficult to convey this amount of verbal information in, say, matrix, where you really have a lot of text to develop. But if the structure was modified similar to, say, a traditional architectural specification, where there is a definite hierarchy and structure to the presentation, you can slip pieces in that are related, and if somebody wants to know about trees related to this, they could look under that section for trees, and it's just, it would be a convenient format to include the information.
To my knowledge, nobody's ever done the Suites Guide, if you will, for planning. And the Suites Guide is a hierarchical framework, if you will, for architectural
CSI format,
specifications,
yeah.
which is incredibly helpful in that arena. I think one of the things that we'll be talking about in the not-too-distant future will be the format of the plan. We've had some observations, and I think it's important for us to go through the diagnosis this way, so we cover the bases, and then we're going to sort of flip it around and tell the story the way that works for us.
What is common?
I don't know what that is, but I think what you're advocating perhaps for, Joe, could be an index or a table of or something, which allows you to.
Data structure, yeah.
If you're interested in trees, it shows up here, here, and here. And if you're interested in this, it shows up there, there, and there. I think that could be something helpful for us. Anything else on booklet 6A?
Yeah.
Surely, I think we would disagree on the trees there. Anyways, I just wanted to make information that I thought was wrong on the plan. I just wanted, number one is, we mentioned about other facilities that weren't under the purview of the town of Branford. December 29th of 2015, the town of Branford took over Foot Park, so Foot Park is a town facility. I wanted to make that correction. And also Branford Hills Park, the old Branford Hills School is now Branford Hills Park. That was put under the purview of the Board of Recreation and Parks and Recreation just this past year. So I just wanted to make those corrections. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alex, while you're up there. Alex, while you're up there. Maybe you could elaborate on the school facility uses versus the parks and how that works? Any overlaps, or who owns the high school recreation facilities and maintains them versus, and how those things overlap, because I think there's a lot of overlap, and you're the best person to discuss that.
Yeah, so the Board of Education actually, and I think that you had brought up about combining services, we've really done that over the last probably 20 years, and each 5 years we keep pushing that ahead to work more closely. A great example is Public Works and the Parks and Recreation. So we kind of mirror each other in a lot of ways, but we support each other's services. But some of the work that maybe they had done before, or that maybe the schools have done before, we've kind of taken it over under the Parks and Recreation Department. I'm talking about, we've done it with all the community buildings, all the gardens in town. So we've come a long way. A lot of the different parks, outlying parks throughout the town. So that all does come under our department, and that's a big change in the last 20 years. So we have really gone in that direction. We haven't, we've worked with the Board of Education, but we haven't climbed that mountain yet. And we've talked about it. We've had conversations maybe a decade ago with the Board of Education. They were seriously looking at combining services at that time. And we've talked about it on many levels with the town and the Board of Education. And I think we streamlined a lot of that, and we're still working towards that, so that there will be some overlaps. But all the school facilities at this point do come under the purview of the Board of Education this time. And I guess we can continue to encourage those conversations as time comes on. But we have come a really long way at this time. I'm not sure if that answered it.
Ready for booklet 6B? Booklet 6B addresses the issues related to vehicular transportation. And part of the reason that we've split up transportation into two topics is I think there's meaty matters that go along with both of them. And I think it's important to focus on them separately rather than put them into one sort of significant chapter here overall. So vehicular transportation sort of deals with the roadway system overall for both public and private vehicles, I guess is the best way to put it. The map, which is on page 3 of the booklet, identifies the road classification system in Branford and identifies which roads are the major access roadways within the community and within neighborhoods, and sort of tie all of these things together. And then on the map is identified these hot spots, if you will, along Route 1, which are the areas where we have the most congestion and the most accident history. And these are areas that we should continue to look at in terms of how we can improve the traffic system overall. There are some recommendations in here on the bottom of page 2, which talk about improving exit 53 to a full interchange to help distribute traffic flows. Part of the reason we have congestion right now is we don't have full interchanges, so everybody has to funnel to the full interchanges depending on which direction they're going in, and it exacerbates some of our traffic congestion issues in town. If 53 was a full interchange, it would actually provide quite a bit of relief on the other interchanges and start to help in that regard. Continue to make roadway improvements to address safety or capacity issues. Continue to implement the access management provisions. Access management is a program used by the Planning and Zoning Commission as development comes in, where they try to consolidate driveways and provide cross connections between properties so that people don't have to go out onto the street to go to the adjacent parcel or one just down the street. They can connect between. And by taking those turning movements off the street, we make the street safer, we allow traffic to move. So kudos there, and continue to work in that area. Using pavement management to reduce the long-term operational costs of roadways. There is a graphic on page 4 of the booklet that shows that pavement doesn't depreciate in a straight line, if you will, from when it's put in. It lasts pretty well for a long time until the oil starts to degrade and then it starts to drop off. So along the way, if you can put little incremental investments in to kind of refresh the road, you'll keep it in good condition. If, on the other hand, funding is delayed or deferred, it starts getting on a steeper part of the curve, and now if you need to then look at fixing up the roadway, it's much more expensive and can be quite daunting, if you will, in terms of overall pavement condition. So recommending that we continue to monitor the pavement management approach. A recommendation in here in terms of traffic calming provisions on page 5. Traffic calming is a provision that we try to help people recognize that a street is not just for vehicles at full speed or full tilt. And we look at ways, particularly at some of the downtown streets and other areas like that, to calm the traffic down, to have it behave better in that type of situation. When we get to the next booklet, there's a corollary that goes along with this, which is called Complete Streets, which is we try to introduce pedestrians, bicycles, and other facilities in the street as well to take advantage of this space that we have laid out. So this one here is, again, possible traffic calming techniques, which might help some of our neighborhoods as well. The key recommendations in the document at this point in time, number 1 is improve exit 53. Next one is to address safety and capacity issues on major roadways. We continue to do this. We rely on the state for assistance on state highways, but they continue to monitor these situations, both in terms of safety and capacity. We can continue to help with that with access management along these major roadways, particularly at commercial developments. The next major strategy is addressing issues on town roadways. This includes pavement management to try to be as cost-effective as we can to maintain our roadway system. Looking at traffic calming in inappropriate areas to make sure that we're respecting the roadway needs, but also the neighborhood needs. And then the issue of sea level rise. What are we going to be doing in terms of sea level rise and what and how it affects roadways? Because maintaining some of these roadways in a number of different conditions or situations could become quite expensive.
There's also a challenge there that a lot of the roads that are likely to be impacted by sea level rise are state highways. So there needs to be coordination with the state in those situations.
Thank you. Thoughts or reactions to the transportation? Vehicular transportation?
Maybe just following along with that, with exit 53, just in terms of semantics, this has been a long ongoing effort by the community to work with DOT over, I guess, decades now. So maybe just changing it to continue to promote improvement of exit 53 to a full interchange. It's not something that's in our control, unfortunately.
Can I just step in for a second?
Sure.
So I was the reviewing engineer like 15, 20 years ago on the proposal, and again, the update. And the state's position has always been that they are not opposed to it, but it was highly unlikely that there would be any funding available. But maybe we should be encouraging a public-private partnership. There are perhaps benefits for developers in the exit 53 area, and if you could encourage partnership, then maybe funding would be available.
Yeah, that could certainly be a piece of it. And again, I'm not probably the best person in the room to speak to it, but I just wanted to bring it up as
But there's also some issues safety-wise at exit 54. So you could develop you could perhaps get safety funding from the state.
You're talking about issues with I-95 itself or the,
Yeah.
yeah, the weave,
Well,
or is that part of it?
the weave and there's a substandard on-ramp,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
there are some avenues that could be explored there.
Have we tried, had there been sort of attempts at public-private at 53 in the past? Or is that, you know, with some of the development that has been looked at?
I believe there have been discussions, but I don't know if there's been anything concrete since I've been here in the last couple of years.
I know, it's not recent, but I don't know where they all were at.
Okay.
So I think, if I may, yeah. So for those of you who have booklet 5C with you tonight?
I just have two more things.
Sure.
Okay, so the new industry standard lingo is crashes or collisions, because the idea is an accident is an act of God and is not preventable, but all crashes and collisions are preventable. So,
You know, you say you learn something new every day. Motion to adjourn.
Yeah, that was a good one.
and then in some of the areas to address, how are safety issues investigated in Branford? Is that done by the engineering department, or is that reactionary by the police department?
I think it's a combination of the two. Janice, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, for the most part, I mean, obviously the first responders, the police department knows about the problems. If my office doesn't know about it, they may bring something to my attention. As you know, at the COG level, there's oftentimes studies being done. There's actually one currently being done by COG where they've hired consultants to come in and to analyze all the data now that we have the good database up at the state about crashes, because all the crashes that are happening are reported to the state. So there is currently a study underway through COG to identify problem locations. A lot of ours do, from the preliminary meetings we've had so far, do tend to occur on the state roads, state intersections, but they have identified some on our local roads, and we'll be getting more information on that.
Thank you, Janice. I didn't mean to derail the conversation, so the only thing I wanted to point out is in booklet 5C, on page 6 of that booklet, is a concept study that was conducted for the exit 53 area in terms of possible development, redevelopment, and this could tie into the concept of public-private partnership in terms of how perhaps some of these issues could be addressed. So people have been looking at this issue. I wouldn't say that there's a solution yet, but maybe I think it's wise of us to diversify our approach to exit 53 and not just say state fix this up, but to also lay out the possibility of a public-private partnership to address this issue. Otherwise, we're going to be putting all of that traffic back on state roadways at the other interchanges, and that is going to exacerbate problems elsewhere. So there might be a solution in that regard, and I think we might throw it out there as a possible consideration. Sound like a decent idea? Okay. Anything else in terms of vehicular transportation?
Yeah, under page 4 on asset management, you
Yep.
have about the sharing of driveways in Route 12, that Route 12 is not in Branford.
Good catch.
Where are you looking at?
The last sentence under asset management near the top of the page.
It says Branford
yeah,
currently
no,
does
no.
this along Route 12.
No, that's the typo on my part. I know we don't have Route 12.
And I mean, does Branford have a place that does that, or does Groton have something like that?
I don't know if
No.
Groton does or not.
I mean,
We do,
this-
it's on
this-
Route 1. Is that something in the zoning regulations? It's an access management requirement that
Okay.
it be examined.
oh, so,
development.
but they do have something that is just Route 1?
Say Route
Yeah.
1.
Okay,
It's just a
that's what I was,
Thank you.
No, good catch, thank you.
I have big fingers, and I think I hit 2 keys.
Does it only apply to Route 12, or excuse me, Route 1?
Yes,
Where's
at
Route
this
12?
point.
Groton to Mass.
That's an interesting question. I think the most significant opportunities for us to effectively implement access management are along Route 1. Are there other areas where we think we should should mention this as a possible solution.
It's been talked about on Montauk Street, some of the backs of the office buildings that are along Montauk. They had a plan at one point to connect all those things across the back, which takes the building owner's permission, obviously, to, or want to get involved with something like that. But I think that that's a great place along there to join all those deep backyards that they have there and create, the purpose of it was to create additional parking as well as making the entrance and exit easier.
Driveway consolidation can be looked at for any development anywhere in town, if it makes sense.
Absolutely.
Maybe it should be considered.
Yeah,
So
we do, the commission does.
Oh, okay.
But it's an active requirement along the Route 1 corridor. It's in the regs. That's the difference.
Harry, is there, I was going to suggest we add some language which says investigate expanding the access management provisions to other areas or other developments.
Yep.
Is there a tweak? I mean, if the commission is doing it informally now, do you think there might be a regulatory benefit to identifying it specifically as a consideration as part of a site plan or special permit?
I definitely do, and I think there's one area, as you go up Cedar Street towards exit 54, I think that is not in the Access Management District,
Yeah.
and that's certainly a stretch. If a couple of those properties on the east side were to be redeveloped, you'd certainly want that to be considered.
Okay. So I think that's a recommendation, which is continue to do it on Route 1, but investigate or expand this to other areas. Excellent. Any other thoughts or issues? Bill?
Question.
Yes.
Under strategies, you have monitor fuel costs, and I'm not quite sure what the objective of that would be.
Where are you looking now, Bill?
Page 5. That's the
that was
2008 POCD. I see.
No, it was in the 2008 POCD. That was at the time, you may recall, the gas spiked to like $4 a gallon, and there was quite a bit of concern and consideration at that time. And so it ended up being its own element in the POCD, and not that fuel costs aren't a continuing concern, but it's not as big a concern as it was 10 years ago. So it's possible that that element will not receive the attention or prominence it did in the 2008 plan. Ready to move on to pedestrian and bicycle and transit. So I think this booklet here, again, looks at the issues related to pedestrians and bicycles. Pedestrianism is becoming a far more prevalent issue in communities because it enhances the quality of life, it contributes to community health, it makes a more livable community with a higher quality of life, and as Dagmar pointed out earlier, it's these types of interactions which help everybody sort of live longer, better lives, etc. Branford is fortunate because we do have the Shoreline Trail, which is moving along. That is a significant benefit to the community. We have the Trail of Branford. But what we don't really have at this point in time is a focal approach, if you will, or strategic approach to what is our priority one sidewalk area. And so what I was going to suggest for your consideration is that we might want to look at areas around the train station and a radius, a walking radius of the train station, and also other areas which are in the Branford Center districts, maybe not over here across the river because it's not connected, but to say that this is our priority one sidewalk area, so we should do everything we can. If we had limited dollars, we'd want to focus them in this area. And then perhaps priority two sidewalk areas could be some of our commercial developments along Route 1 or in some of the business areas, Indian Neck, Short Beach, or these are business zones. This one actually here is the marina, and this one here is the hospice. So they're business zones, but they don't really relate to what our priorities might be. And then a priority 3 sidewalk area, Branford is fortunate because we actually do have bus service that connects from Branford to New Haven. The bus service is either along Route 1 all the way to Madison, or in fact there's also a bus route which comes into Short Beach and then through the center of town, the train station. And so priority 3 sidewalk areas might be areas within a quarter-mile walking distance of the bus routes. So I'm not suggesting that these should be the priorities, but perhaps it would make sense for us in Branford to have a sense of priorities. So as Judith pointed out earlier, I think that one of the recommendations in here is the idea of a Bicycle Pedestrian Committee to look at these issues. So that's one recommendation. There is a discussion in here on two key things, the first of which is this concept of complete streets. Complete streets, or historically, streets were laid out for vehicles. We paved them for cars, we used them for cars, and people who were walking along the street were considered to be interlopers in the paved way in the way of cars. And that thinking is changing now, that we can use the pavement or the surface, or at least the right-of-way, to provide for pedestrians and bicycles, including sidewalks or including shared right-of-way paths and other things like that. And that is the concept of complete streets. The state, DOT, has adopted a complete streets policy, and the town might want to consider doing the same thing to promote thinking about this type of thing. There's also been what I consider to be a somewhat seismic shift in terms of state thinking, and that is that they've started to look at opportunities to reduce lane widths on streets. So historically, where the pavement was striped created wider lanes, and that wider lanes encourage people to think that they can go faster. Statewide, they're looking at an 11-foot travel lane, which is a little bit, maybe a foot or two less than what it's been, but that is huge in terms of telling a motorist this is your space and helping bicyclists and others feel like there might be space for them on the roadway. Now, there are some roads in Branford where this really will not make much difference. There's just not that much room. But if people start to have more respect, motorists for pedestrians and bicycles for motorists, we can perhaps enhance this situation overall. I mentioned already the bus transit. We have, again, fixed routes, as Dagmar pointed out. We also have paratransit, which is the buses, and I didn't know about the medical cars, so that's very helpful as well. And of course, we have the train station and the Shoreline East service there. So in terms of bicycle and pedestrian strategies, the first one is to expand bicycle and pedestrian facilities. First of all, to consider adopting a complete streets policy for the town, which would set us up in a framework, if you will, of thinking about bicycle and pedestrian issues as road improvements and other things are undertaken. And then expanding the facilities for pedestrians and bicycles, and starting off, I think, with the Bike Ped Committee to look at these types of things. With the work that happened with the transit-oriented development, the improvements down at the harbor, the developments that are happening, strengthening the connections between downtown and the harbor is a great first step. I did see a discussion, I think it was Mr. Lust, about connecting along the river in terms of a boardwalk. These types of things are huge. And again, trying to find ways to prioritize these could be important for the community overall. So a number of those issues which are identified here in this table could all spring out from a bicycle pedestrian committee. The next major recommendation is about enhancing transit linkages, rail transit, and enhancing the Shoreline East rail service, continuing to support the fixed route bus services in town, and also the paratransit services that we have here for people that need it. Support the construction of bus shelters, bike racks, and benches, and other things at transit stops, so that, again, we try to create a holistic system overall. Thoughts in terms of the strategies in this booklet on bike, pedestrian, and transit?
I think it's important to distinguish the uses. So, take Foot Park. There should be sidewalks going to and from Foot Park, the major parks. I think there's a real need for sidewalks between the downtown and towards Indian Neck. Those roads are particularly narrow. But I see it in two key areas, so sidewalks to support pedestrian use in and around the downtown, and then sidewalks in and along the bus line, because those corridors, especially with the traffic that comes when there's an accident on the highway, it all goes onto Route 1. So if people are taking the bus along there, I think that's particularly important as well.
And I think, again, one of the things that you can tie into is sort of schools. So right now, for example, Walsh, hang on a second here, Walsh is right here. We haven't identified as a priority areas within schools, and in fact, perhaps we could or should, in concert with the Board of Education and others. So it's an example of an omission, if you will, from this priority listing, but it could be an important part of our future, that sometimes kids don't walk to school because there's no sidewalk. So if it was a big priority, it might even actually save us some money in terms of bus transportation costs, that it might be issues that we could look at. But to identify areas that might be priorities could be an important step forward for us.
A suggestion that may be a little too specific at this point, but I've always thought that the town center and Supply Ponds Preserve are actually pretty close together as the crow flies, but they feel really separate in terms of how you get there. And Chestnut Street runs from the center of town right out to Route 1. Now, the problem is you get to Route 1, and then you've got to negotiate your way across Route 1, but that might be something to look at in terms of connecting people to the natural areas in town.
And part of the problem with that is Chestnut Street's a very narrow street.
Oh, I know.
And that's, but you're right, because they are so close together. If you run, you realize running from the center of town to Chestnut Street is really not a long run.
Right.
The cross-country team runs from high school all the way around up there, and,
Yeah.
you know, it would be nice to have sidewalks so they can get off the streets.
The other thing that occurred to me, I've not had a chance yet to walk Trail of Branford or parts of it or whatever, but impressed me that in a sense we almost have a complete loop. And what Judith mentioned before, and the question is if we could sort of figure out a way to close the loop between the Shoreline Greenway.
There's a trail that you don't show there that comes down from Route 1 down through Short Beach. A bunch of it's on roads, but there is a segment that's been omitted there that ought to be included.
I think this gets back to the issue we talked about in open space, that our database isn't as perfect as we might like. But I think, again, if I happen to live in Simsbury, and Simsbury's on the Farmington Valley Greenway Trail, and the difference that it's made in the community, and I think we have gone, we're silver, I believe, on the bike-friendly, and it's made a huge difference in the community. If Branford could take advantage of that with the train and our Shoreline location, it's just, it's a ripe tomato just waiting to be picked. It's a great opportunity for us. But I do think, as Judith pointed out, a bike ped committee is going to help us focus our efforts with the resources we have in the best way possible. We can't do everything all at once, but the question is what could or should our priorities be? And that might be something for the plan to recommend. Anything else on?
Just a couple of thoughts, Glenn. I like the layout. I think this is a great start. And I think the final comment you made about integration of, and maybe we ought to make that a little more explicit in terms of how the sidewalks may work with bike routes and complete streets and transit, and what you might need at the end of where the Shoreline Greenway Trail might end, and you're walking near a park or something, you need a bike rack, and how all these things all would work together comprehensively, in addition to focal points, things like parks and so forth that were mentioned, how to sort of tie it all together a little more tightly.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also the type of thing that the bike ped committee could start to provide some focus to. So I think the plan should definitely prime the pump on this to get it up and rolling, and then the actual specifics as to what comes first. And it could be Chestnut Street. I don't know what it could be.
Yeah,
but
that all could fall out, yeah.
Exactly.
We may want to talk a little further about yet another committee in town, or should it be a task force, or what should it be, or should it be responsibility of some existing group? I don't know. The other thing that's been at least talked about in-house is developing, I think we've talked about this with Planning and Zoning Commission, has been taking your idea of the priority areas for sidewalk development and improvement and really making that very specific. So when the Planning and Zoning Commission looks at development of a property, they've been faced with the question of, well, does it make sense to ask the applicant to put a sidewalk in or not? At this point, it's there's a gap here, there's a gap there. This would be maybe a piece of sidewalk, and there's no sidewalk anywhere near it, but it's on the plan of conservation development, so what do we do? That's been sort of the debate they've had several times. And we've talked about developing maybe a really detailed sidewalk plan in some locations in terms of, right, we've got pieces here of sidewalk all the way along the stretch of Route 1. That's a definite required. Another area might be you do it in a certain length of time or something, or some kind of funding mechanism or whatever it is. So it might be a menu of options to address
Yeah, and so, for example, if the fallout from either the POCD or the work of the committee was to identify the priority areas that are here shown on this map, essentially all business zones right now are shown as priority 2. And the commission might take that to say any commercial site plan that comes in is going to provide sidewalks.
Right.
And then it might be the responsibility of the town to make some of these final connections or et cetera as things happen over time. So
Right.
it may end up being Waterford, because they had Millstone Nuclear Power Plant paying their taxes, or 80% of their taxes, built a sidewalk, the townwide sidewalk network in 3 or 5 years. They did it very quick. We're not in that situation. But if we can do this slowly over 10, 20, or 30 years, the benefit to the community in terms of walkability, even property values and other things like that, could be significant.
Yeah.
There's safety is an excellent point. So Harry, your point on page 6, I think, is number 3. Number 4,
Yep.
let me back up. Number 1B, I also wanted to point out, part of the issue related to sidewalks is often the sidewalk ordinance. Many sidewalk ordinances require that the abutter maintain, in other words, clear snow or ice, and nobody really sort of enjoys it. Everybody likes having a sidewalk system, but don't recognize that they have a part of it. And also the responsibility for repair. If the sidewalk cracks, who fixes it, or heaves, who fixes it? And these are important issues. Some communities have said, we'll take this over, we'll do this. And I don't know what the solution is for Branford, but something to think about.
Yeah, I mean, this certainly is a cost factor to long-term maintenance, and that's something we
There
need to
is,
consider,
but if we
too.
believe in a sidewalk system,
I'm not saying I don't, I'm
I
just saying
understand.
it's something
So
to consider.
it's just a question that again, needs to be resolved.
Yeah.
Last thing I wanted to point out is that number 4 here, again on page 6. I'm familiar with a community in Connecticut that enlisted both local bikers and bicycle shops to, if any of you are skiers, you're familiar with the way they categorize trails as, what is it, green square, blue circle, black diamond, there you go. And they used a very similar approach for bicycles in the town, so that people who came to town knew this is a challenging road. You may not want to take your kids down this road, maybe there's another route. But if we could start to use our local resources we already have to categorize these streets, we're way ahead of the game in terms of this type of stuff. Anything else on bike ped?
I have one thing, just a thought on your map.
Yep.
You've got the red line showing a trail and the pink line showing a trail. Maybe you want to put them in your legend.
Yes, I did, thank you.
Okay.
I did, saw the same thing. Then booklet 6D today is the booklet related to utility infrastructure. These are the things that many times we take for granted because they work for us many times. So the utility infrastructure discussion is broke down a couple of different ways. First of all, we're talking about piped utilities. Piped utilities includes things like sewers. Branford has a sewer system, 125 miles of sewers, 50 pump stations, serves about 85 to 90% of the properties in town. The facility is expected to have adequate capacity, but it's the type of thing that the sewer plan is somewhat dated, and it may make sense to revisit this. State statutes also require these days that a POCD identify sewer avoidance areas. These are areas of the communities where we don't expect to be providing sewers in the future. So if in fact it is the community's intention to provide sewers everywhere, the plan should state that. And what we've shown here on the map on the bottom of page 2 is outlying areas of the community where we may not, or have not been considered, if you will, as being part of the sewage treatment area. And I think that we did embellish this a little bit and extended the line out for the possibility that sewers might, at some time in the future, be needed or wanted in Stony Creek. And that's certainly an issue, I'm sure, which is going to cause discussion, et cetera. But if it's not in the plan, it becomes difficult to do it in the future. So this doesn't make it happen, but if it's not in here, it could stop it from happening. So again, I think in terms of the sewer plant, we need to continue to maintain and improve what we have. The next piped utility is public water. We have public water from the South Central Regional Water Authority. Based on the information which is publicly available, it seems that will be adequate in terms of quantity and quality of water for our future needs.
One possible exception is the east end of Leeds Island Road, east of Quarry Road, where there is no public water, and that's really close to the shoreline, and we ought to be considering the possibility that those people who are on wells there will start to get saline intrusion into their wells and need to have public water.
Yep. And so the question is, who's going to, that becomes sort of a, whether it's a coastal related issue, who pays for that? So the key issue we looked at as part of the POCD was, do we have enough water? Yes, we do. We have an abundant supply in the region at this time. Is it in all the places we might want it? No, but we can solve that problem over time. So I think the first issue is we're good for supply, maybe not in some of the locations. Natural gas service, again for security and other reasons, the information is not as available, but I know that natural gas exists in the community. I understand it's in sort of some of the key areas that need it or want it, but not everybody in town, I understand, has access to it. On page 4,
I would just, I think everybody on the committee got my email of a couple of reports that I'd come across recently that were sort of eye-openers. And one thing I hadn't realized was just how competitive electricity generation is with local customer heating use.
you want to hold that? Because we're on page 4 and that's on page 5?
Okay.
Just bear with me for a moment.
Right. But
So the last piped utility is stormwater. We don't sort of consider stormwater a utility, and we're not advocating for a utility, but I think storm drainage is going to be a much more significant issue for us in the future because of what we call these rain bomb events and other things like that. The pipes were sized for the development that was anticipated at that time. Houses in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s were smaller than they are today, that people add things on which add impervious coverage, and so then they're surprised when the culvert doesn't work, and they don't necessarily recognize their own role in contributing to impervious coverage and runoff. So on page 4 is highlighted text there. The stormwater system is expected to face a number of challenges during the planning period due to the frequency and intensity of large storm events. And so advocating for a more widespread solution might be a way for us to go. Some communities have established a requirement for even residential additions, that some rain garden or other provision be made to percolate water. The map, which is here on page 4, I realize the people in the back of the room definitely cannot see it, and even the people who have a printed copy in front of you, it's very small.
Yeah.
But the purpose of this map is this is the hydrologic soil conditions. And soil types which are green and yellow are generally well draining and will accommodate LID approaches and water infiltration. And soils which are red and brown will not. So this becomes the start of a guide, if you will, for areas.
So there's a lot of gray on this map.
Gray are areas where the soil type has been disturbed as a result of construction and other things like that. Or those are lot lines that are just graying everything up. But I see everybody squinting at this and very interested in it, so I think my note is go full size. This map may or may not lead to public policy in the future. But if people at least knew that in this neighborhood we have tight soils and it's not going to drain well, at least they're aware of this type of situation. So I think it could be very useful and helpful for us.
Can I ask a question? Do we
Yes.
consider hydrology and the soil condition and when we look at planning and zoning and all of that? No? Okay.
Not enough.
Okay.
We tend to trust that the engineers are designing stormwater retention facilities that maintain a pre and post condition, but oftentimes we're not made aware of the geotechnical soil substrate.
Okay.
And I think some communities, the state has adopted a state stormwater quality manual, which does have requirements, the calculations, if you will. And we could approach this more on a regulatory basis than a more structured approach, I guess is the way I would call it, in terms of this. And actually put developers and engineers on notice that you have to accomplish these objectives unless the soil conditions are such that you cannot. And that might be a way to do it. The cheapest way sometimes for a developer can be structured water, because you just get rid of it, you don't have to worry about it. But there are other situations too that the cheapest way is actually a greener approach. But what we might want to start thinking about doing is defaulting to the LID or greener approach.
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
I think we experience a lot of pressure in town with the zoning regs. What's allowable for building size doesn't coordinate with what's required for the impervious surface area. And it's set at 60%, and our regs are a little inconsistent that way. And I think if there were a way to integrate the design of low-impact development and facilities to make greener spaces, that we should also allow the parking that's needed for these retail spaces, and maybe it's a better understanding of what's the right amount of development for a particular site as it relates to stormwater. I mean, right now, the stormwater management is just no more water leaving the site that entered it and no change, but I think there might be a better way to analyze that might end up with a more attractive, more environmentally sensitive product and still give them the parking that they need to make the facility work. So I think there's a lot of tension between those two things.
And I think there are communities that have found ways to make that work. So the most damaging component of rainfall is the first inch. Because what happens is all of our cars in the parking lot right now, maybe there's an oil drop from each of us. It's not a lot, but when you add it all up, it adds up. And so the first rainfall comes and it flushes that away. So the goal for much of this is to capture that first inch of rainfall and allow the ground to treat it, because vegetation will assimilate it. So you may have been in parking lots where the parking lot islands are called innies, not outies. Historically, we used to raise them up 6 inches. Nowadays, they drop them down 6 inches, and that becomes an infiltration area. So we can refit for this stuff with standards, and they do have what's called pervious pavement, and they do sort of put cobblers or other things down. So these are things that could be investigated. And I think maybe we can talk about that.
Is that something that we should look at on a residential basis as well as commercial too? I mean, I know even things like total impervious surface on residential lots or bulk requirements, do we need to be thinking about whether they're too much in some areas? I can think of a couple houses that are covering, like, it looks like about 90% of the lot, and so just wondering if that needs to be something.
It could be. I think the lowest hanging fruit is commercial industrial, because 60% coverage with pavement.
That's really restricted for that. But I mean, if you take a residential use and they're, not completely covered with impervious coverage, why would that use need so much pavement, and a retail use need 60%? That's where the inconsistency comes. And maybe it's just a matter of predating zoning and nobody's monitored it, but I think there needs to be some balance.
And I think there's discussion over time, because again, with the frequency and intensity of rainfall events, it's going to get worse. And if everybody expects the town to clean up their mess, there's probably not enough money available to fix all of these problems. So if we can distribute, I think the philosophy is to try to capture the rainfall as close to where it falls as possible, get it into the ground as quickly as possible. That's the new philosophy. The old philosophy was get it into a pipe and get rid of it as fast as we can. That's not. Now we're doing detention, and we're trying to figure out ways to get it into the ground. So maybe we start that discussion. Going to residential rain gardens is a fairly big step. It's often not supported by the community. They view it as being an unfair imposition that they have to do something their neighbor does not. Even though they're adding impervious coverage, which is why they're in for a permit, they don't want to have to do a rain garden. They'll put it in and then take it out later type of thing. But again, all of these issues, if every household in town did a little bit, we'd be way ahead.
Well, that's why I think if the word encourage is in front of whatever we're talking about here, I think that we should be encouraging it in residential as well as commercial, so.
Yeah. So that brings us to wired utilities. Bill's chomping at the bit. No, I'm kidding, I'm kidding. So,
No, we're gonna skip that one.
So I think in terms of wired utilities, again, the question is, there are really sort of 3 major components, if you will, to the electrical system. There's the generation of it, which we don't do in town. There's the transmission of it, which is how it gets here. And then there's the distribution of it, which is actually what happens in town. This element of the plan looked essentially at the local distribution system, which is the thing that we're concerned about. Significant progress has been made over the years in terms of reliability and capacity of the electrical system. It's far better than it used to be. and adequate power is expected to be available. So now the question becomes one of what happens in town. So with that, Bill?
Yeah, and this gets back to my earlier point about things sort of being in silos. I mean, because I've been thinking about climate change and renewable energy and things like that a lot recently, you know, it seemed that there were three things that all of a sudden started coming together, but not necessarily comfortably fitting together. One was the need to address future sea level rise by trying to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions as a community. One was the predicted increase in the adoption of electric vehicles, which is great from a point of view of reducing your greenhouse gases, but it requires electricity, and it's a load demand that hasn't been there before, and how is that going to fit if the generation, transmission, et cetera, system might be stressed. And then the last piece was this report that came out from ISO New England, the grid management, that looked at it and pointed out that New England as a region is relatively gas poor. Our current infrastructure for gas pipelines is adequate for providing gas for residential use, basically heating kinds of things. But that to the extent that the generators are more and more going to natural gas, there being a potential issue down the road. And they did some projections out to 2025, which somebody said it's almost here. I don't think it's something that we have to panic about. When I sat down and sort of looked at the numbers that were talked about in that ISO New England report, spread it out all over New England, it's not likely to be a lot of hours impact anywhere. But there are things that we could be doing as a community that would help the situation. I mean, adopting renewables in a smart way so that we don't so that maybe we can reduce people's dependence on natural gas for heating and free up more of it for electricity generation. And also what we could do to, adopt things like battery storage, which is still expensive, but I think it's going to be following along the cost curve that solar panels have followed. And incorporate some storage in, which will allow the community to sort of even things out and maybe focus on areas like the center of town where you've got fire headquarters, police headquarters, shelters, things like that, and think about a microgrid with some storage so that you actually could build in resiliency at the sort of the utility level. And that was the point I wanted to make.
You might be able to piggyback that with charging stations and that sort of thing as well.
Exactly, right.
So, those are good, interesting articles. So,
Thank you.
I just would add energy efficiency is extremely important and is really the least cost resource compared to natural gas or anything else, so.
Other utilities include cable communications. We used to call it the phone system, then it became phone and cable TV. Now it's more cable TV because many people are giving up landlines. But the issue is, again, we have the wired infrastructure in place to meet our anticipated needs. There are things going on in Connecticut in terms of the gigabit project and other ways to try to increase that. It's hard for a town to take the bull by the horns by itself and do this. So much of the infrastructure is in place and we can be making it better, but our basic needs will be met.
Glenn, that's something, have any towns taken that on to create a truly high-speed, a more attractive internet community?
Not that I'm aware of in Connecticut. That doesn't mean it hasn't happened. I do know that school systems have wired themselves together, if you will, in terms of some municipal facilities, et cetera. I do know that there's metro areas around the country that have done this. But again, I'm not aware of anybody in Connecticut.
Yeah, I'm just, it's just a thought that, high-speed communication is what everybody wants now, and everybody needs now. And we have plenty of, dropout zones still around town and poor communication areas in terms of internet speed. So, it could be an attractive thing for a town to be able to advertise that they are a high-speed community,
In addition, I'll just note that the Economic Development Commission has been reviewing proposals and is very interested to provide enhanced broadband capability because of businesses that rely on that. And as technology advances and businesses become more data intensive, they already are very heavy data, it's just going to grow, particularly with our bioscience community that we've developed and is now thriving and we hope to grow. I think those are all very heavy data users.
Let me back up too. It just occurred to me as Kathy was talking that the city of Groton started Thames River Valley Communications or something like that. But then after a while they spun it off. I don't know if it just didn't work out. Harry, do you remember anything about that?
I don't.
So they run their own water company.
Yeah,
They started a utility company as well with internet access, but then they spun it off. I'm not quite sure why. So something, I made a note here that we can continue to encourage that. And then the next issue is somewhat related to that, which is wireless services. And again, more and more people are relying on smartphones here to keep track of what we're talking about and look at the booklets and data and other things like that. So the suggestion in here, the sort of strategies in the plan right now are address the piped infrastructure, maintain the sewer system and address issues from sea level rise, update the 1996 wastewater treatment facility plan so that we're ahead of the game on that. Support expansion, maintenance and expansion of the public water system, and use the town's water commission to evaluate areas that might benefit from that. Support maintenance and expansion of natural gas. Maintain and improve the stormwater drainage system. I've made some comments here based on our conversation about LID and possibly investigating the enhancement of that program and possibly even considering extending that to residential, but to investigate that issue. Addressing wired infrastructure, continue to work with Eversource to improve utility reliability, work with utility companies to balance tree trimming with aesthetic and other concerns, explore opportunities to relocate wired utilities underground where opportunities arise. And then wireless utilities, continue to work with telecommunication providers and the Siting Council to provide wireless services to meet local needs.
That's a big one.
It is, because I think everybody's familiar with the concept of 1G, 2G, 3G networks. The next network coming out is what's known as the 5G network, because so many of us use our phones for data that the provision is sort of set up for that. There's a new company that's rolling this out in Connecticut, and technology is essentially whip antennas on utility poles, supported by what's like a small suitcase. So it's not these mammoth towers that we've been used to. Those were 1G. They were trying to cover as much area as they could with as few towers as possible. But now the capacity is the biggest limiting constraint, and so these 5G cells are going to be filled in, and they're much smaller.
And I think a lot of what they do in Europe is the same way. They're all on buildings everywhere, little towers instead of these big massive towers that
Correct.
we have.
So again, there's parts of Branford, the more rural areas, if you will, that may not see this technology for quite some time, but there's other areas, particularly Route 1, et cetera, where the data needs are growing to the point they just can't handle it by the big towers anymore. They need to infill. And the good news is that the new equipment and technology is not invisible, but it's not as visible as what we've seen as these monopines and some of the other stuff that have come along. So I think, do we have any telecommunication principles in place, Harry?
I don't believe we do in the plan. I think the thinking has been along the lines of the cell towers that's covered by the Siting Council, and that we really haven't gotten into that outside of on-the-ground placement of facilities and that kind of thing.
Yep.
So it's really could use a refresh in terms of what's going on.
So what I'd like to suggest, I made a note here, is that the Siting Council requires that applicants report to them on the telecommunication principles in a municipality, and if we don't have any, then they report none. That's not the message we want to send to the Siting Council. So I think we could add some, try to avoid cell towers visible from historic districts that don't, scenic views or commercial or industrial areas, et cetera. So I'll put a preliminary list together and we can look at it and vet it, and that might give us some assistance, if you will, in any future dealings with the Siting Council. PURA are the people who deal with the whip antennas, and we'll get notification of those, but unless it's sort of right in front of your house, you might be concerned about it. It's not that visible. So it's something we'll continue to monitor. Anything else?
I just think on the broadband issue, we should have something that says, to be, the existing wireless companies, cable companies, I guess don't really have perhaps motivation to build out the network to support it because, it's very expensive. So with that, perhaps we could, in our plan, encourage broadband expansion to support residents and businesses, because we talk about to meet local needs in the least, this is more of a visibility of towers issue as opposed to the infrastructure that we need to support our businesses and the community at large.
Good. Got it. Thank you.
I'm not sure we just want to meet needs. I think we want to exceed needs. I think we want to try to be a little bit better than what's the lowest common denominator.
That'll help your economic development.
Right, for
Yes.
economic development.
How can we attract more biotech if we're not tech savvy
Yeah,
ourselves?
exactly. I mean,
Right.
the only other thing that I wanted to add is, we did have one of our speakers a couple of meetings ago talk about the possibility of, that the reason that no one ever wanted sewers in Stony Creek was because they didn't want development down there or large development. But I think with sea level rise, and I think it was Peter talked about this, we will need to be looking at that anyway, and, so should we put something in here under public sewers that anticipates at least investigating the extension?
So I think that part of this is updating the wastewater treatment facility. The actual management and maintenance of the sewage treatment infrastructure rests with the Water Pollution Control Authority, so they have independent jurisdiction.
Right.
I think what we're advocating for here is that their study, their analysis is already 20 years old, and that they should go back and kind of revisit that, particularly given new water quality and other standards. And I think as part of that, the actual decision out of a non-sewered area rests with them. So their 1996 plan had a good evaluation of neighborhoods and districts, and I think what we need to do is have them revisit that, given what we know today, what we anticipate in the future, and they need to draw the line. We can't really draw it for them.
So the plan does include the collection and pump stations and all the other parts that go within, not just the facility?
Yes.
Okay.
The whole system. And again, I think this gets into sort of Bill's comments earlier about sea level rise. I mean, do we need to armor, elevate? What do we need to do
Well,
with
I
these
think
pump
there should
stations?
probably be some consideration there for there's a 500-year flood, and I think DEP has, there's another report they have that's the 100-year flood plus 3 feet.
Freeboard.
Which they kind of go together, so that should probably be part of the consideration.
Good.
I know the TOD looked at some of that, so there may be existing studies or language that would support what we need.
That's the discussion of the booklets. I think, Mr. Chairman, the next thing is open discussion.
All right. Anybody from the committee have anything else to add? I know we've been commenting as we went along, but anything else you want to loop back on that you've been thinking about? Anyone from the public? Janice?
just want to make a couple comments regarding the various topics, not all of them. With regard to town facilities, I think consideration should be given to include sustainable and efficient construction in our goals for new and renovated municipal facilities, as well as any ongoing maintenance projects that we're doing. I think that should be something that's included in the plan. I also just wanted to point out that MP Rice should be moved in the table to, it is an active fire station still.
Oh, I thought it was just a historic engine.
Oh, no, no.
No, it's an active fire
Yeah,
station.
and they have trained, okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, Pine Orchard is no longer an active fire station.
Thank you.
I think Alex already corrected you on Foot Park, so we're good there. I also was wondering, should we be adding the actively managed park facilities into that booklet, 6A for facilities, or is that covered under some other one that I haven't reviewed?
The recommendation in here was to undertake a comprehensive recreation plan for facilities in terms of documenting the needs, the facilities, and then putting it all together. So they weren't identified in here for that purpose. Do you think that they should be?
Yeah, I think it would be helpful to at least identify the facilities that are actively managed by the town as recreational facilities, separate from, open space, obviously.
Thank you.
With regard to 6D and stormwater, I do just want to, I think we should add into the plan that we do need to allocate resources needed for the MS4 permit compliance. Believe it or not, we're actually at the point now where it's almost being treated as a utility by DEP, and under our MS4 permit, the town doesn't really want to go that route. Obviously, we don't have that intention, but we do have a lot.
Can you explain what that is? I'm sorry, I don't know what that is.
So it's the municipal stormwater permit that we have with DEP, and they've just renewed the permit, and they've added a lot of requirements to the permit. We actually have to do some extensive testing across the town because most of the town is an impacted area for stormwater. We also have to then we have to study impervious surface areas throughout town, and then we have to start coming up plans for disconnecting impervious surface areas from the stormwater discharges. We have been doing ongoing testing. I think the first plan was adopted, I don't know the dates exactly, 2005, 2003, and it's been an ongoing plan that we've been in compliance with doing stormwater testing at like 6 or 8 locations throughout town on an annual basis. We're checking for turbidity, bacterial levels, and things like that. I could tell you for the most part, the results aren't really great. So anything we can do to improve those, I would encourage. We do encourage when we meet with property owners in terms of individual house development to try to include some type of, disconnection, rain gardens, dry wells for roof drains, things like that. But it's nothing that we can require, so I do recommend we start including those into regulations. But we are on the cusp, and right now looking at our compliance with the MS4 permit, I'll be asking for additional funds going forward from the town in order to meet that compliance. And it is going to be a large undertaking, especially when we get into the actual work of trying to come up with solutions to lessen the impervious area discharge locations.
If I could just jump in for 1 second to echo what Janice is talking about. We have a situation where the federal government requires the states to have these permits, which gets down to the municipal level. The permit is reissued every 5 years.
Yes.
And the standards have been getting more significant each 5. So we're catching up right now with the current permit, and there's probably another one coming. I think it's 4 years out now, the next statewide. And these issues are going to continue to be a requirement, if you will, on the town. So having the capacity to do that is an important consideration.
Right. So I think that we should at least mention it in the plan itself. And then one other comment regarding 6C with your bike ped committee. I think it's important not only to look at where we want to extend sidewalks and bicycle facilities in town, we also need to take a hard look at what we have. And one of the issues that the town needs to actually do is take on an ADA compliance and come up with a plan for ADA compliance. We do have a lot of sidewalks. A lot of them are not actually up to standards. So in looking at where we can have a wish list to extend sidewalks, but we also have a responsibility to have our current facilities, properly constructed, maintained, and meeting the ADA requirements as well. So it is a challenge. And we are responsible, according to our current ordinance, for all repairs by the town, because we were advised in the past that sharing costs with adjacent property owners wasn't possible. So there certainly is a need for some updates to our ordinance too, in terms of who's, shoveling snow. We also, I don't know that you're aware, but DOT does not maintain any sidewalks within state right-of-ways, so that all falls to the town through the ordinance, which then transfers to the adjacent property owner for snow removal, but the actual repairs and replacements of those sidewalks still falls on the town to do, as well as in areas where there is no adjacent property owner, say at interchanges and things like that. The town is responsible for snow removal there as well. The town does extensive snow removal on some areas of town for sidewalks, and a consideration should be made to maybe rethink that plan and really focus on the areas where we're required to remove snow and maintain the sidewalks to the areas where we do have town facilities as well as these state facilities that have no maintenance being done to them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who has a comment, or?
I just have a quick comment. Something Janice said about
Yep.
sustainability. Can we include locally sourced materials and services to encourage that?
Yep.
Wherever that's appropriate.
Yep.
Jeffrey?
Hi, my name is Jeff Clark. I wrote a letter to you in December about my very targeted specific request for pedestrian and bicycle enhancements to South Monterey Street, basically from Parkside Village to Long Island Sound, both on the Linden Avenue side and to the Sybil Avenue side, where you meet the Sound. I noticed when I looked at today's version of the pedestrian bicycle transit plan, it no longer classifies South Monterey Street as a key sidewalk area, which it did in the 2008 plan, which makes the case for being much more specific, as about which somebody said, in where you place sidewalks. So if you approve the plan the way it's written here, it's going in the opposite direction. You will be taking sidewalks off the plan of conservation and development for that area, whereas they were on in 2008. So I'd appreciate it if you would review that, and I'd hope that you would all go to dinner at Lenny's tonight, and then please walk from Lenny's up to Parkside Village, and then walk back down. Maybe you can do it during the daylight, and then tomorrow do it on your bike. And if you don't agree with me that that's the least pleasant place to be on a bike or to be walking, then I'm nuts. Thank you.
You're not nuts, Jake. Jeff.
It's a key connection, too.
It is.
I mean, there's no other alternate route to take.
Well, we also have all the development going on up on Monterey Street now on the corner, where that's a perfect place to walk down.
I do want to apologize, though, because I think the point I was trying to make in the map I put together was the fact that we should have a sort of a priority hierarchy. I didn't mean to ignore the recommendations in the 2008 plan, but I was trying to make the point about having a strategic approach. So I will go back and revisit that plan, and maybe we'll throw those in as a separate priority level, just so that we don't lose those.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that.
Yes. Sorry, Bob?
Yes. Yeah, I'm Robert Baker. I'm here to advocate for measures to accommodate and encourage bicycle use for local transportation. By use for local transportation, I mean commuting to work and transit hubs and travel to perform routine errands within town, including minor shopping. And one side benefit of this is maintaining cardiovascular health on a regular basis. For people, cyclists going for local transportation, the primary considerations are conservation of time and energy. You want to get to where you're going quickly, as quick as you can, and avoid hills, essentially. It means accommodating an average speed of 12 to 20 miles an hour for most people on relatively level terrain, which grades generally under about 3%. Secondary considerations are safety and avoidance of aggregating factors such as traffic, noise, narrow shoulders, South Montague Street, parked cars, intersections and driveways, and poor or dirty pavement, glass and sand traps. And I've heard tell that the maximum range for routine bicycle transportation is about 5 miles. And this makes sense to me. When I was about a third of the age I am now, I commuted for 6 months, 8 miles to North Branford, and another time 3 months for 10 miles to Guilford. And that was quite draining, even at that age. Therefore, with the 5-mile limit, encouraging bike use for local transportation would also help to encourage using businesses within Branford, especially in the downtown area. As constructed and designed, the Shoreline Greenway Trail does not encourage bicycle use for local transportation. There's a steep slope near the former Pine Orchard Firehouse, which could easily have been avoided, but would be a real killer for using on bikes, and is designed to stretch between Pine Orchard Road and Tabor Drive, has a few right-angle turns with a 50-foot radius. And my research, this would only accommodate about a 15-mile-an-hour speed on a paved surface and be considerably less on a soft surface. So I believe the Plan of Conservation and Development should specify that in any case where the Greenway can be used to encourage people to get off of major routes, be designed and built to accommodate local bicycle transportation. Also like to point out there's a strong potential to develop a greenway along the eastern border fault from Ivy Street north of the Turnpike to the North Branford town line in the vicinity of Twin Lakes. Because of the geology, the fault itself, the route would have very gentle grades, and most of the land is already under public ownership. The remainder of the land is residential zoned and could easily be could accommodate a route as part of the open space designation or set aside for the property. So I think the Plan of Conservation Development, this route would only provide connection from a low-density residential area, Northford Road area, and some adjacent areas in North Branford to the center of town. So I think it would primarily be attractive as a recreational route. So I believe the Plan of Conservation Development should show where this open space set-aside should be so that people interested in developing the properties would know beforehand what's expected and also what the potential is. There's also potential to extend the route from Ivy Street south of Route 1 to Cedar Street on a 3% grade to come out pretty much opposite St. Mary's School and to avoid a 10% grade on Ivy Street. I believe that I don't know if the town already has this property. It was part of the deal to accommodate the elderly housing on Hillside Avenue. And at that time, the developer owned connecting pieces to Cedar Street and Ivy Street. The Cedar Street parcel was vacant. The Ivy Street parcel had a house on it, which he apparently was planning to use as an access point. And I don't know who owns that now. About South Montague Street, I've taken that route by bicycle thousands of times. And yes, it is. it appears to be hazardous, but because it's a known hazard, you play it safe. One problem there is that South Monterey Street was laid out in 1838 when the Hobart's Bridge was constructed. That's now the Monterey Street Bridge. Two rods wide. So you only have 33 feet to accommodate the various uses. So that's problematic.
Yeah.
So thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Okay. Tracy?
Hello, everybody. I'm JC Wyatt. I have a quick thing I want to mention on the South Monterey's. I take it by car, and it still makes me nervous, just so you know. I think South Monterey's is an important part of this infrastructure problem, too, that we mentioned tonight. I made a bunch of notes. If you think about on South Monterey's, we're Amtrak rail bridges. Certain trucks, certain types of equipment can't get underneath that bridge to get down to a good part of the people who live in our town. Have we ever thought about that one day that might have to go over the railroad tracks and the type of facility or look that's going to create on that side of that type of our town, especially with a new development coming and how it's going to relink. But at the same time is thinking for safety and protection. Trucks only could go down Indian Neck Avenue to get down there. Something ever happened at that bridge, we have to loop them all the way through Pine Orchard. So I think looking on that South Monterey's Amtrak bridge, which will be an incredible amount of money, but that's another part of the infrastructure problem, that how Branford circulates. And I think that's something that we're thinking about. I just mentioned a minute ago about the trail that would be linking there. I also would say in our notes here, instead of calling it a trail on the river, I think we should be calling it an esplanade or a boardwalk. I think it opens that feeling of community instead of a trail on the riverfront. So I think in certain words that we bring into this POCD, I think those are certain words too that could be brought in instead of the word trail. Because I think that's part of this experience that you come down to the river. One other thing that we mentioned a few minutes ago is the sidewalks, which, I mean, I live on a house that has a sidewalk, and it's a sense of community. People talk to you, bring their dog down, see what's going on, tell you what's going on in the political world. They tell you things on that sidewalk. And I think in the town of Branford, it's a stone of where we want to lead Branford. It is a place to make a center point of life and a quality of life is through the sidewalks. So I'm thinking on the sidewalk plan as we discussed tonight, I think we do need to go ahead and look at a bigger plan of what we can do on our sidewalks in the town of Branford, and, you know, they just mentioned, make it AA compliant. That's a great idea. It's a situation that does make it very important here in the town of Branford. And one other thing I want to mention is being on parks and open space, we have listed in our website, town website, that we have 15 parks. I can't think of which all 15 are, but it says in our town website we have 15 parks. That is a huge part of our town infrastructure. We put budgets to them. We have commissions in our town. So I think with these parks that are being listed inside the town website, I think that should be part of the infrastructure. There's money needed to be utilized on all of those parks. That's a huge amount of, I think, infrastructure we might be overlooking because we're thinking about schools and buildings and roads. Our parks should be a part of this infrastructure plan. And one other thing that I have a couple more, is the utility power lines. We keep hearing about them, but what are we doing about putting them underground? It's currently that it's going to cost $1 million a mile to put them underground. If we don't start doing it now, it's going to cost us $2 million a mile to start putting them underground. It's a part of our protection and safety down the road that I think the power line companies that are looking for the rate increase, at the same time as we can be as a town looking how to make neighborhoods link together through sidewalks, but also function safely through storms if we start putting our power lines underground, protecting more of our tree lines, and making those be part of our quality of life in Branford. So one other thing I mentioned before, I was trying to get a few minutes, we have cell towers in all over our town, a few of them actually that I'm aware of. I'm still trying to figure out, I don't know exactly how tall they are, but Is that the projection why we have dead zones? Is that why I went down to Stony Creek to a meeting, my phone doesn't work? How are we going to get these dead zones fixed? One of the reasons I'm saying is getting the height. Obviously, we have a tower it's called the Tower in downtown Branford. It's about 60 feet. That's 6 stories. That roof line can probably hold and do things that help protect our town from many of the types of utility infrastructure that we're talking about. Obviously, I'm a skyscraper person. I would love to see more of those types of buildings in our town, but those could be objects of where we utilize some of our, where to grow our town can be how our buildings and our rooftops are utilized. And one other thing we talked about a minute ago is the open space and, sorry, let me go back here, stormwater planning. I live in Arizona. It's like 7,000 golf courses. The golf courses in Arizona are used for storm water planning. When you go at certain times when we have monsoons, you go by and you think your neighborhood changed because it's full of water when we have rain. The golf courses start holding a majority of that storm water. And I've always been looking downtown, and you know I want golf courses here. It could be part of this planning in our future in our town. That are bigger points of bringing better development, quality life, seniors want to live here, retire here, vacation homes around golf courses, which can be part of the planning of our town, of how we hold, just like you said, stormwater planning. I hope we all look at this plan as a future, as there's many things that people want in our town. I have a list too, but it's not about pointing what I want, it's what the town wants. And I've heard that our town is 37% aging right now. They should be part of this planning. I'm probably the youngest person in the town that's part of our planning. But what about helping them get their voice here? And I think today we also should be looking upon how our town of Branford is looked upon on our seniors and how we can also make this a better infrastructure-based town here in Branford. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else have anything they'd like to share? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I realize we've gone just a little bit late here tonight. I have a couple other issues I just wanted to report on real quick. You may recall we did an online survey based on our discussion at the last meeting and the assistance of Community TV. We got a little spike in responses. We're up to over 320 right now. So I think at this point in time, if the committee is comfortable, I'd like to keep it open and encourage people. Maybe I can work with Harry and Rich to get another press release out or something like that to try to get another spike. I haven't peeked at the results yet, so I'm as intrigued as you are as to what we're going to get. But I wanted to report on that, and we'll keep it open for a little bit longer. The other thing I wanted to bring up for some feedback from you on is we had talked about the possibility of another meeting on February. I appreciate all the work on the steering committee because we've been meeting every 2 weeks, and it's been a lot. We have had great public participation at these meetings, so I'm requesting from the committee is whether or not you'd like to have that meeting in 2 weeks and discuss the booklets we've had so far, continue that discussion, provide additional opportunity for public input. Harry has reserved the firehouse on the Thursday the 22nd, not Wednesday the 21st. But that meeting was on our calendar as a possible, and what's the committee's pleasure? Like to go ahead with that, or our next meeting after that would be March 14th? I do have 2 other booklets in my back pocket, if you will. One is related to plan implementation, and the other of which is a discussion about sort of alternative plan formats, the chapter arrangement that Bill and Joe talked about earlier in terms of, do we go with the silos the way the booklets are? Do we recombine them? So at some point we need to have that discussion, but I don't think we're quite there yet, if you will. We can push those down the road, because I think the real issue is to, I would like to have further discussion of the booklets so that the committee has an opportunity to tell us things you really like, things that not so much.
I guess the question is, do we want to get started on the 22nd with starting to put some of this stuff together? And it could also have, we could plan an hour and a half and then still have, and half an hour at the end for anyone else who wants to come and make comment. And be primarily a working session, but also allow for public comment at the end. You guys up for that?
Yes.
You're all good?
So I don't think there'll be any new work product for this meeting in terms of booklets for me. I will hold up on the implementation because I think, again, this is an important one. What I was thinking about for the meeting is that I will be preparing some charts, if you will, that sort of identify some of the recommendations in the plan. And we're going to start moving those around as to which ones are higher priority or lower priority in terms of strategies and recommendations, things to add, delete, subtract, et cetera, and follow it that way.
Could we maybe also look at, I know you've been taking tons of notes here from additions and comments. Maybe we can start to have some addenda or whatever to some of these pages.
That's an excellent point.
So we could have, one from 1A all the way through 6D.
I will make that my responsibility. I will go back through the booklets, my notes, and things which I think are hanging issues. Realistically, I'd like feedback from the committee on all the booklets and say, yeah, this one was good with no issues, or this one we need changes. But the things that have clearly come up as issues, why don't I highlight those so that we start with that?
I think
as a
that'd be
framework.
a great use of our first meeting.
I agree.
So, and then the next meeting, we can, dig in.
Yep, so we'll see you in 2 weeks, and I think you can expect that from us about a week from now.
So no meeting on the 21st?
No meeting on the 21st.
22nd.
The challenge is the availability of the room, but we did reserve the 22nd, which is at the fire station, which is, I think, better, more convenient.
Very good.
And what time?
4:30 to 6:30?
We reserved the room a little later, I think the original thinking was we were going to have more of a substantial public outreach, or that one might be needed. I'll investigate whether we can have it earlier, like same time and having it 4:30 to 6:30, so I'll let you know by the time.
Would that be everyone's preference to try to do this same time again, if we can? Sure.
Okay.
All right. Anything else? Motion to adjourn? Meeting adjourned. I always wonder why you take votes on that.
Second that motion.
The preceding program was brought to you through the support of the Town of Branford. Watch town meetings or other videos on demand at BranfordTV.org.